Hello once again, and welcome back to Purple Mafia. Minnesota Vikings pull off one of the great upsets in a while, beating the Detroit Lions today in Detroit, 27 to 24. The last time the Minnesota Vikings beat the Detroit Lions over there had to have been about, 2020, maybe? It's been quite a while. Obviously, it's been quite a struggle going back to the Matt Patricia days. Since Dan Campbell took over, it's been pretty tough. Even this season where Detroit was struggling to get a single win, they finally got their first win against the Minnesota Vikings in Detroit. So it's pretty much been winless ever since that game when Jared Goff led the Lions down the field to basically a walk-off victory. Well, Minnesota Vikings, J.J. McCarthy returns, and it looks pretty spectacular out of the get-go. Unfortunately, again, the opening drive by Detroit made the Minnesota Vikings defense look awfully pathetic, extremely poor tackling, especially on the final play. It's like, are you trying? Or are you just kind of putting on a show? Like, let's make it look like we're trying to tackle this guy. Deporta was deporting the Vikings basically on that play. I shouldn't have said that, but I said it. Uh, Other than that, though, J.J. McCarthy showed up to play. It was spectacular. Hopefully it's not just a Michigan thing like, oh, I'm back in Michigan now. This is where I won the national championship. And this could be a J.J. McCarthy of the future. He had a quarterback rating all the way up into the 130s, even as high as 144, I believe, at 143 around there, around some point in the third quarter. Unfortunately, it would drop a bit as the Detroit defense would improve dramatically down the stretch and would get more and more aggressive. McCarthy would miss a few times, have to do some throwaways, this and that. Ultimately, his quarterback rating drops down to 82.6, and including the interception where it was kind of like a guys wrestling for the ball, Naylor and the Detroit defender who ultimately did get the interception at the end of the day. Trying to remember exactly who that was. My apologies at the last minute here, but nope, there was no touchdown. That would have been Arnold, that's right. So I apologize for that. Basically, as Naylor and Arnold were wrestling for the ball, Arnold ultimately did gain, sorry for saying ultimately so much, did gain possession of the ball enough that the referees did say it was an interception. Conversation was back and forth that it was a bit of a tie, and that tie goes to the offense. That was frustrating, but thankfully the Minnesota Vikings would hold on as J.J. McCarthy was pretty unflappable, generally speaking, despite, again, the pass rush getting better and better from Detroit. As McCarthy would get sacked 5 times, despite the fact that the Minnesota Vikings offensive line was probably the best it's been pretty much the whole season, I would have to say. It had been a huge struggle all year with the offensive line, with injuries and such. It kind of helps when you have O'Neal and Darisaw back healthy. Kind of does. Brandell remained the center, of course. Even Aaron Jones Sr., as we can call him, that looked awfully spectacular during the course of the game with 79 rushing yards, and of course had a few very nice catch and goes. Well, a couple anyway. A couple nice plays. 2 catches for 20 yards, so nothing super big. Almost 100 all-purpose yards, but unfortunately, just like Aaron Jones typically did not play the whole game, went out with injury again in the game, unable to finish, so kind of irritating there. Don't believe it's anything super serious at the moment, but you never know. Jordan Addison also had a pretty exciting, after the Vikings would be penalized on a play right before, because the Vikings were called for holding, it felt like 15 times in this game. Maybe more like 3 or 4, but it felt like 15. Jordan Addison, unflappable as ever, running for 16 yards, breaking 3 tackles. 3 tackles, unblocked Detroit defenders. Jordan Addison broke 3 tackles to get to those very tough 16 yards for a crucial first down. So that was insanely exciting. Only 2 catches for Jordan Addison, but they were both pretty exciting, including the 31-yarder, which was the longest chunk play of the day for a Vikings receiver. You also, again, had a Vikings running back at 31 yards. That was Aaron Jones. And then you had Vikings kick returner in Price get 61 yards on a return. That was extremely exciting, putting the Vikings in prime position to score their second touchdown along the way. That was extremely exciting. J.J. McCarthy, though, extremely, Detroit just, great. Chicago just beat Cincinnati, or at least I think they did. Cincinnati had them, and less than a minute left. Anyhow, unless Cincinnati pulls off a miracle of miracles after that. Sorry, distracted with that one. Well, that sucks. so much for that, I guess. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln. No, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, for Detroit fans, J.J. McCarthy, again, unflappable. And, of course, the guy who gave up the interception, coughed up the ball, you could say, didn't ever have full possession of the ball. That's kind of why the ball ultimately wound up with Mr. Arnold defensively for his first NFL interception. He was a first-round pick in 2024, was Arnold. Naylor, of course, a later-round pick in 23. Obviously, he's had his valuable moments and his not-so-great moments, but Jalen Naylor nailed it down the stretch as McCarthy would throw what looked like, again, it was the kind of throw that is clutch, gutty, and despite that Detroit defense frustrating the hell out of McCarthy in the second half for the most part and into the fourth quarter, clutch play on a 3rd and 5, whereas you have to get this first down to win the game, otherwise Detroit gets the ball back, only up by 3. As again, Isaiah Rodgers was burned a few plays earlier, much to our chagrin. I mean, that was depressing to say the least. But McCarthy clutches all get out on a great over-the-shoulder throw to Jalen Naylor to lead the Vikings to victory into victory formation at the end of the day, to run the clock out and escape the obnoxious Detroit Lions fans and the obnoxious Detroit, generally speaking, and win the football game. So finally the Vikings beat Dan Campbell in Detroit. It has been quite a while, I believe about 5 years, hasn't it? 4 or 5 years since Dan Campbell took over. The Vikings have been winless in Detroit. And Vikings now get the victory. So feeling like $1 million at that one. And it does feel like we ultimately do have a quarterback of the future, because I think the Vikings do have a quarterback of the future, and it is J.J. McCarthy. And again, the quarterback rating does not jump out at you nearly as exciting as it did in the first half at 82.6 now at the end of the game and the final score and everything. But, I mean, things are very promising. He's a very gutsy young man, and we just don't want to hear any more stupid reports of, this was hurt, this was now he's going to miss a few weeks. We don't want to be hearing any more of those reports. So hopefully McCarthy stays healthy. The offensive line stays healthy for the most part, and the Vikings may have a chance to do something pretty fun and maybe extremely special in the next couple of years with J.J. McCarthy at the helm. So you feel like $1 million with that. Perfect place for it to all start up again, I suppose, for real this time. More of a kind of a full game versus just a single bleeping quarter of good football in Chicago. And nothing against Atlanta. Nothing. That was just, what it was. But 2.5 to 3 quarters of very good football from McCarthy, I would have to say, when you add it all together. And Vikings do have a positive future going forward with McCarthy, and for it to begin in the place where he won the national championship, the state anyway, of Michigan. Great. With that said, sorry this one is a little longer, but it kind of had to be. I mean, what'd you expect against Detroit? The Vikings finally got it done. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Check out the Purple Mafia podcast, which will be coming out tonight. And yeah, with that said, we'll talk to you next week.